all your stuff. What can figure it out? That's how it chooses you.
Well, hello, Teresa Sparks.
Hello, Claire Patton. It's very nice to see you.
I was just about to say it's nice to see your face.
My dirty ass hair.
I think it must have been a long week because it feels like I haven't seen you in forever.
Yeah, I'm glad I'm not glad it's also been a long week for you because long weeks are quite tiring sometimes, but I am pleased we are on the same page because it feels like it's been about 10 years since you and I have spoken.
Right. Agreed.
I had my hardest midterm this past week and I passed.
Woo!
Like literally just passed.
Ugh.
But, better than not passing.
I also want to explain to everybody, in case you don't know, Teresa is incredibly smart, and she's an incredibly committed student, so if she just barely passed, this motherfucker was hard.
Thank you. That makes me feel better. Relative to that, a passing grade in this class is 80%, so I didn't get a 60, I got an 80. But yeah, it's not what I'm used to, let's just put it that way. So I had that, and I had studied for that every spare moment for the 10 days before it. And I have my second hardest midterm on Monday, which is tomorrow from today, which is our recording day. So my hair is pretty dirty because there hasn't been a lot of time for hygiene and self-care. And also 2 days ago, we had a huge rainstorm down here. Did you guys get that crazy rainstorm in Weld County?
We've had quite a few, but I don't think probably on the scale that you're talking about.
Friday afternoon, it rained so hard that it was frightening to be outside. I was inside, luckily. I didn't have to be going anywhere. It rained really hard for about an hour and then hailed and then finally passed. But somehow during that time, the amazing plumbing in this building did something and my bathroom sink leaked into my bucket of toiletries that live under the sink. And so I lost all of that bucket of stuff, just like destroyed by dripping water. And the things I'm trying to salvage from that mess, I've put in the shower to dry out and drain and do whatever because I don't have time to hand dry anything. And so I haven't washed my hair in 2 days. Is the end of that story. Isn't it aren't you so glad you stuck with it? Boy, I'm sure that was worth it when you finally got to the end.
Well, a couple of things. A, I was going to say your hair looked sleek because it was super pulled back.
Thank you.
And B, as you are comforted by me having a long week, I am comforted by your plumbing woes because it has been over a week of no water at the old homestead.
Oh my God.
Now, we can flush the toilet, which is great because I have been out here when that was not possible. And that's just, you just can't be in that place. But we have had mud coming out of our faucets for over a week.
Oh my God. What diagnostically, what's going on with that? Have you called the mud guy?
The mud guy has come out and the mud guy is like, that's a lot of mud. The well people do not know what is happening. But this is a fairly common problem. But for some reason, it's weird. I'm like, you just do wells. Like, how could this, there are a couple of solutions, stopgap solutions.
Yeah.
So that at least we can use our water. So the only reason I do not have dirty hair right now, I did have incredibly dirty everything. A hotel room was rented. And basically everybody just went there and showered. Not together,
In sequence.
over the period of however many hours you have access to a hotel room, everyone out here went and showered there. And of course, at the end of my shower, I'm like just washing out the conditioner from my hair and the water starts dribbling out. Like the pressure completely goes away. And I was like, what the fuck? Lost my mind. I guess it's just a week for plumbing issues everywhere.
Yeah. I love the impromptu civil engineering required when the shower changes pressure suddenly and dramatically. Let me see if I can make a containment system for this water on my scalp.
We will just call this a bleak week and be done with it, I think. I don't know about you, but what I've discovered this week is that self-care for me frequently takes the form of grooming and bathing. Mm-hmm. So not having access to that when I'm stressed has been kind of tough. And I had to find other ways to cope. Basically what I did was I went out into the garden. I was like, I just need to be there. As always happens, the beauty out there sort of revealed itself to me. And I just started taking photographs and it shifted my mindset a bit into one of receiving beauty and being grateful. And that really helped a lot. But, you know, the shower was good.
And also the shower.
The mediocre shower was excellent.
I thought you were going to say your self-care shifted to be more in tune with your landscape, so you went out and started taking dust baths like a chinchilla.
That's what I should. Tim did go out in his underwear during a rainstorm.
Oh, nice.
That was very cute.
He's like, I'm going to bathe. Oh, it's raining. It must be shower time. Yeah.
I mean, we are really just 1 degree away from being animals all the time. This has just confirmed that for me.
I mean, I like it. Like, relying on the cycles and rhythms of nature to meet my needs, I enjoy that when it's not a surprise.
Right.
Again, see, also having the right tool for the right job, right? Like, if I know I'm going to have to, it's a lot more fun because I'm prepared.
Hey, everybody. Thank you for joining us today on the podcast, It Chooses You. That lady I'm speaking to is Teresa Sparks.
And that lady who is speaking to me is Claire Patton. She and I talk to each other about things we like. We write love letters to the world, as you put it a few weeks ago, and I like that very much, so I'm going to continue with that. So we talk about things we like and things we hope you like, and thank you for joining us today.
Don't forget to like, subscribe, and download the episodes if you enjoy them. It helps us reach other cool people just like you. Thank you. Teresa.
Claire.
Today, I'm going to tell you the story of Elizebeth Smith-Friedman, U.S. Codebreaker and total badass.
I'm so excited.
Elizebeth Friedman came up when I did my episode on Plants Are Awesome and So Can You. I was talking about the North Atlantic Vegetable War. Elizebeth Smith-Friedman came up in regards to code breaking for the U.S. Coast Guard against these rum runners. So that is part of the story. That's how I heard about her. You and I think both just sort of put her in our back pocket like, she could be interesting. Oh, well, she is.
Awesome.
She is interesting. My sources for today, I did get a lot of information from Wikipedia, but my main source is the PBS docuseries American Experience. They did an episode called The Codebreaker, which is based on the book The Woman Who Smashed Codes by Jason Fagone.
And she's the codebreaker.
Yep.
Okay.
The Codebreaker. I mean, she's really the only one, historically. There were 0 other codebreakers ever.
Yeah.
At least in my mind. During what?
Alan who?
That's right. Who's Alan? Elizebeth Friedman was born Elizabeth Smith in 1892 to a Quaker family from a small town in Indiana.
Nice.
She was the youngest of 10 children.
Just like Cleo Lithgow.
Yes, you said something like, it's that period of time. I think that I could use that phrase again. We are in that period of time. From a young age, Elizebeth loved to read. She loved to read poetry. She wrote quite a bit as well. She was born to a pretty basic family, and she longed for a life of adventure. A lot of this came about because she pitied her mother. You know, if you have 10 children, you're not really doing anything else. That's your life's work.
Yes.
And so she saw this in her mother and saw that she was unable to pursue any kind of joy of the mind. Felt sorry for her and resolved to not be that way.
I'm just imagining the baby in the corner with like a notebook, just like observing her family. They're like, oh, mom's taken on quite a bit with all of us, huh? Okay. She doesn't seem to enjoy it very much. Just like noticing all the things in the corner. You're like, you know what? This Quaker thing isn't for me, you guys.
I'm 1, and even I know this is insane.
I don't even have the words to describe how much I know this is crazy.
So to give you an example of this, she really hated her last name. She called it the odious name Smith because she thought it was too ordinary and not really indicative of the life she wanted to lead. I want to get right into this code breaking thing, and this may sound a little weird, but something interesting about Elizabeth's name, she hated her last name Smith, but her first name is spelt oddly. It's not Elizebeth. It's Elizebeth. Her mother named her Elizabeth with an E because she didn't want her to be called Eliza for some reason. But because we're talking about code breaking, I feel like that E is extremely important. That E is the little window that opened her up to living an extraordinary life, I would argue.
Yeah.
That E was a gift from her mother, a seed.
What can I give my 10th child who I will see only on Fridays, and I will ask the younger children to take care of her? I can give her this. I can give her this vowel shift. I can give her that.
And I feel like when we're talking about code breaking, what you do in code breaking is you look for systems, but you look for what doesn't belong, what sticks out. And to me, that E in her name really sticks out. That was my first clue, like something's up here, something's afoot.
That's cool.
Her father thought she was a difficult child.
Good for her.
She really wanted to go to college, but he did not believe in the higher education of women. So he said no. And she continued to pester him. And finally he said, fine, you can go to college. I will lend you the money at 6% interest.
Dick.
This fucking guy.
6%. Also, 6% at that time, I'm guessing, was very, very nice.
I feel like if you have really shitty parents, they should be condemned to die after you so that they can see how amazing you became and feel really shitty about it.
I mean, that's what justice is, right? One day they'll know what they had in me. Yeah.
The rapture of the intellect, so to speak.
That's right. They're left there just staring in wonder at the amazing things you've created with your mind and your heart. They understand right before they die.
At university, Elizabeth studied Greek and English literature. She, again, had this real love of language. After college, she taught in a small school in Indiana, and she hated it, and she quit after just 1 year.
Because teaching sucks, y'all.
I love that because that's what happened to me. That's what shifted my life around was after college, I taught for a year, and I hated it, and I thought, oh, it really does matter what career path you choose, and I'm never doing this again. So let's go. And I went off and studied physical theater in Italy. I feel that in common with her.
Teachers are heroes, y'all. Teaching is hard and terrible work. People who teach are heroes, period.
100%. God bless y'all, because I can't do it. I don't know how the human spirit endures.
My sister is a wonder of nature, teaching high school science to the children of Trump supporters. I mean, come on. Every day is a fight.
That's God's work, yeah. So after she didn't like teaching, she went to Chicago and she thought she was going to find a job. So she was there for a period of time and the money started running out and she could not find a job. So she suddenly realized she was going to have to go home to this asshole.
This fucking guy.
He would have given her so much shit.
He would have been so smug. The smugness would have just palpable in the house.
On her last day in Chicago, she decided to go to the Newberry Library because they had on display Shakespeare's first folio from 1623.
Nice.
So this was a copy of the original, I assume it was a copy of the original Shakespeare plays written out. She loved Shakespeare and she wanted to see this. So she's like, well, I'm leaving, so I'm gonna go do this. As she's looking at the folio, the librarian noticed her and they started talking. And I love this. This is just so women. The librarian was like, so you like Shakespeare, huh? And she was like, yeah, I do. They must have really connected in that moment. And eventually the librarian said, you know, that's funny because there's this rich guy that's been coming around looking for someone to help him with this Shakespeare project. So he's been kind of skulking in the library looking for someone to do this.
Yes.
So the librarian called George Fabian, and within the hour, he arrived at the library and was standing in front of Elizabeth's table. George Fabian was an industrialist. He was 6'4" and 250 pounds.
Holy shit. He's a linebacker. Linebacker, captain of industry. George Fabian.
Exactly. And Elizabeth was quite small, so this must have been kind of a funny scene. She was this tiny 24-year-old woman facing down this huge rich dude. And she must have thought, well, if this guy doesn't kill me, this job might be awesome. The first thing he said to her was, would you like to come out to Riverbank and spend the night with me? Riverbank was this 350-acre estate in Geneva, Illinois. She went with him to his limo, which took them to the train station, and they rode out to Riverbank, his estate. George Fabian did this really interesting thing on his estate. He built a lab, and he started going around and recruiting and sort of collecting scientists to work in his lab on his estate. He just basically put them in the lab and said, go for it. Unlock nature. See what you can find. Mm-hmm. That is so cool.
That's the best uses of money. If you are wealthy and you don't do that, you are missing that opportunity. That is the best use of obscene wealth.
Fabian wanted Elizabeth because he was obsessed with proving that Francis Bacon had written Shakespeare's plays.
This is this guy. Okay. Yes, my college entrance essay was about this controversy.
So he believed that Bacon had left code in the text of Shakespeare's plays that indicated the truth that he wrote them. And he wanted Elizabeth to crack that code.
It's basically a 16th century Rickroll. He's like, he spells out Francis Bacon in the first letter of every line as you go down.
So Elizabeth didn't know anything about ciphers, so the first thing she had to do was immerse herself in the system that Bacon himself had invented in 1623. So basically the way this Bacon cipher worked was that each letter of the alphabet was broken into a binary system of A's and B's. So each letter of the alphabet corresponded to a combination of 4 letters, all A's and B's. And those A's and B's, in turn, represented a letter from the actual alphabet. Within Shakespeare's first folio, there were these variations in fonts. An N wouldn't always look the same. And so the theory was that if you took these sort of odd men out letters and switched them to this binary code, that you would get a secret message. Elizabeth did this, and it was hours and hours of tedious work, but she loved it because it's pattern recognition, and our brains are wired for pleasure when we recognize patterns. This is a ancient survival mechanism within our brains. Like, aha, I recognize that good mushroom. Aha, I recognize that bad mushroom. At this time, she met William Friedman, who was a geneticist, but he loved photography. He and Elizabeth met because he was photographing the pages of Shakespeare's Folio that she was using to break this code. William was very dapper. He was persnickety about his appearance. Gradually, the two of them started to fall in love. There's a lot of pictures of them together, and he took photographs of her, of course. And they were so cute. I looked at them in these pictures, and I thought, oh, who do they look like? So she looks like Mila Jovovich, and he looks like a young Sean Penn.
Okay.
They were a beautiful couple. William was a Russian Jewish immigrant. As they get to know each other, Elizabeth starts to teach him about ciphers, and they started working together on them. And they used Fabian's library of books about code to work together and decipher these supposed codes in Shakespeare's work. He was mathematical, and she was a language expert, so they complemented each other really well. And eventually they were like, okay, there's no secret message in Shakespeare's plays. Sorry, Fabian.
I think I know how Francis Bacon died, and I think it's really funny given how smart he was. I think he actually died studying refrigeration, seeing how long or how cool he could keep a chicken carcass. And so he was basically working in the cold. He might have been outside in the winter rubbing snow on a chicken and caught pneumonia and died.
Oh, no.
Yeah, I think that's how he died. Just makes me laugh that he's like stumbling in the snow with a chicken carcass. Like,
hey, self-care is important, no matter who you are.
That's right. If he had better tools, he would not have gotten sick.
So Elizabeth and William got married in Chicago in May of 1917. William's family was very angry about this because they wanted him to marry a Jewish woman. So around this time, radio had become really important. It had been invented in the 1890s, and it was a key tool in warfare. This also made codes and code breaking really important because obviously you're just sending your transmissions out there and you have to ensure that the enemy can't understand them. As the U.S. entered World War I, the military was caught unprepared because they had no code breaking initiative in their intelligence agencies. And they were like, oh shit.
Oh, this is a huge oversight, y'all.
I think we might be in trouble, everybody. So around this time, George Fabian thought that he could serve his country and raise his status by helping the military with this code breaking, and he had now had this little team. He offered to set up a code breaking team at Riverbank, and this was the first ever U.S. code breaking initiative, and the military accepted his offer. George Fabian was like, hey, Elizabeth, William, you guys are going to be in charge of this. And they were like, what? And he's like, go.
Yeah, I imagine the conversation went something like, I'll have my scientists work on this problem. I'm imagining that phrase was a part of the narrative. And meanwhile, his scientists are like, we're working on our own shit, which is what you said we were allowed to do. All right. Codes it is, sir.
Basically, Elizabeth and William start getting inundated with this backlog of messages from the Navy, from the Army, and from the Justice Department. They're like, oh, thank God you can handle this. And they get these messages they're supposed to decode, and they don't know how to do it. They've been working on this very specific project with a very specific cipher. Because the assignment had come as a surprise, they were completely unprepared. And I mean, you can't have stakes higher than that.
Right.
The security of the nation is at stake. Please do something you don't know very much about. So they had to learn about encryption, and they had to do this very quickly. So right now I'm going to tell you about the difference between a code and a cipher. A code is usually replacing a word or a phrase with another word or phrase within a text, so it looks innocuous. It'd be like me sending you a message where I substituted the word candy to stand in for the word weed. And I've sent you a message that says, I'll bring some candy by your house.
Are you offering?
I could. Do you want me to be offering?
I'm only getting B's. No.
Would you like some candy? On the other hand, a cipher is letters or a group of letters and the act of changing them through a certain process or algorithm into other letters or even numbers and symbols. So this makes the text completely unreadable. Elizabeth and William were using frequency analysis to decode messages. So in frequency analysis, you count how many times a letter appears, and the more frequently used letters are probably translated into the common letters in the language, like T's or S's, for example.
Anyone who's played Hangman understands that you guess E first.
Again, this is pattern recognition, and Elizabeth was amazing at it. And at a certain point, Elizabeth and William reached the limits of cryptology. They reached the limits of these systems and approaches that had been established, and they basically had to start inventing their own systems and methods to continue breaking these codes. Eventually, they published their systems in 8 volumes.
Wow.
And they basically turned cryptology into a science by approaching it mathematically. It had been seen as an area of expertise for linguists, but they really brought these systems and these mathematical principles to it.
Mm-hmm.
Elizabeth trained the military's first generation of codebreakers. She and William loved code so much that they started using it everywhere for fun. There's a photo of the first group of trained codebreakers. And in this photo, it's Elizabeth and William sitting down with a couple of other civilians, and then they're surrounded by about 30 or 40 soldiers. So they're men in these dark uniforms, and it's a really interesting photo because everybody is so rigid. Like there's this real rigidity and discipline in the photo. But half the people have their faces turned off to the side, and half the people are staring straight at the camera. They inserted a Baconian code into this photograph. The people whose faces are turned off to the side are the B's. The people whose faces are directly to the camera are the A's. If you read the phrase, it is knowledge is power, using that cipher. Knowledge is power was a motto of Francis Bacon, and it was a motto that Elizabeth and William adopted as part of their program.
I can't remember who wrote it, but there's a poem about Francis Bacon, and it's Bacon, like Moses, led us forth at last. The barren wilderness he passed. Did on the very border stand of the blessed promised land, and from the mountain's top of his exalted wit, saw it himself, and showed us it.
That's cool.
He's a smarty pants.
The thing I like about this photo is I think it tells you a lot about code breaking. I'm no expert in it, but that contrast between the chaos of the turned heads and the regimented body language. And I think that's what you're looking for in code breaking is you're looking for intentional chaos. And there's this little, that contrast between the order and chaos there tells you that something's up. I just think it's so cool that they used people to make a cipher. Ugh.
I love that. And I also love that they were still calling it A and B instead of ones and zeros. Like they hadn't quite fully flipped over to the mathematical. They were still language based. 6
months later, the Army started its own code breaking unit in Washington. And there wasn't much more for Elizabeth and William to do at Riverbank. So William signed up for active duty as a field code breaker, so he was sent to the front. But obviously Elizabeth couldn't go because she had a vagina, and that is prohibited. And so in the documentary, they pointed out how frustrating this must have been for her because she fucking taught him how to code break. And now he's being sent to the front and then returns home this hero.
Right.
She's his wife.
What did your husband do in the war? What I taught him to do.
Not to mention the stress of him possibly getting killed.
Sure.
Not knowing if he's coming home. So she stayed at Riverbank during this time, but in her letters to William, it becomes clear that Fabian starts harassing her, and it's possible that he was sexually harassing her and pressuring her to start up a relationship with him. William came back and they ended up moving to Washington, just kind of get the fuck out of there. In 1921, they both went to work at the Army Signal Corps devising cipher machines.
Here we go.
She was paid half of his salary and only stayed a year because she's no dummy. At that point, she thought she was done with code breaking. So she starts having babies.
I mean, that's infuriating. Like, she's the one who's taught all these people. And then when she gets a job doing it, they're like, oh, but you're just a woman. You have a husband who has an income. You don't need this. Or whatever the bullshit patriarchal arguments are for that. Non-arguments. Whew.
So in 1923, she had a daughter, and that daughter was followed eventually with a son. In 1925, 6 years after the Volstead Act, which initiated prohibition, we've talked about prohibition extensively on the podcast, basically no alcohol. So in 1925, the Coast Guard approached her to start decrypting messages from rum runners. Because they had outlawed the sale, manufacture, and transport of liquor, organized crime ruled the alcohol industry. Bunch of criminals, right? Pointless. Bad system.
Bad Kennedy elevating system. A lot of East Coast fortunes were made.
As we've also mentioned on the podcast, the Coast Guard was woefully unprepared for what happened.
The Coast Guard was basically 5 dudes at that point. It's like these 5 we get about 1,000 miles each of coastline that we gotta... I just do my laps. Just doing my laps. See you guys in 3 days.
The rum runners were using radio to organize their meetups and basically to run their entire operation. And they would use code, and they would transmit this code over shortwave radios. So the Coast Guard was keenly aware at this point that they needed to start breaking the codes. They brought Elizebeth on. And in her first 3 months working for the Coast Guard by herself, she decrypted 2 years worth of backlogged messages that had been gathering dust at the Coast Guard.
Nice. And then she's like, I need a raise. Clearly, I need a raise.
She was breaking 25,000 intercepts a year.
Oh my God. Hundreds a day? What is math? I can't do the math. So many a day.
Also during this time, she basically invented strategic intelligence, okay? She didn't just decrypt the messages and hand them off. She interpreted the data. She was like, okay, this is the person that owns this boat. This is the route this boat is regularly traveling. This is how often it's traveling this route. Here's who they're meeting up with. So she started to step back and figure out the overall pattern and who was doing what. Anytime you see a person in a movie with a bulletin board with like the photos of the victims and the crime boss and the places and the warehouse and the red string, like that's because of her.
Yeah. That scene in The Wire where the kid approaches the board and they think it's what's his name in the middle and he rearranges everything based on what they know. And it's actually like that guy's way off on the side. He's not the center of this investigation at all. That scene in The Wire is because of Elizabeth Friedman.
100%. So this allowed the Coast Guard for the first time to be a step ahead of the gangsters. In 1931, Elizabeth built a code-breaking unit for the Coast Guard. It was the first code-breaking unit led by a woman, so she was doing all the hiring and training of the code breakers. Her title was the Cryptonomicon in charge.
That's right.
It's pretty cool. As the U.S. government was starting to be able to bring indictments against these rum runners and these criminal organizations, Elizabeth was the key witness in several trials against these members of organized crime.
Against these people who were just giving us what we wanted. Just seeing to our needs as a nation.
Against these public servants. It's only right that I should be compensated for providing such a valuable public service.
And she's up there with her math. She doesn't answer in language in the witness box. She like taps it out in Morse code. She won't look anyone in the eye. She's just always communicating in code.
So one of the biggest trials and takedowns involved Conexco, which was a company that was legit on the surface, but really they were overseeing the manufacture and distribution of alcohol. Conexco supplied liquor to Al Capone, among others. In the documentary, they compared it to the government bringing a case against Walmart for rum running. So the U.S. government indicted Al Capone's brother and other Conexco head honchos. And Elizebeth testified in this trial in New Orleans in 1933. During this time, the government was worried that Capone and his crew put out a hit on Elizebeth. It was very common for people working on behalf of the U.S. government in Prohibition to be killed.
Oh, sure.
They actually had to assign a plainclothes detail to her to protect her during this trial.
They send one of yours to the hospital, you send one of theirs to the morgue.
It's no good if you don't raise the stakes. During the trial, Capone's attorneys were focused on trying to discredit Elizebeth. Every time she was in the witness stand and she started to explain how she was breaking the code, they'd object and go like, Your Honor, this is witchcraft, clearly. No one understands how this works. There can't possibly be any kind of logic behind it. And they kept doing it over and over again, right? And it was probably easier for them because she was a woman. Clearly, a woman talking about something I don't understand must be a witch.
Yeah. There's nothing to understand here. It's not that I don't understand. It's that she's talking nonsense. There's nothing to understand. She clearly has a vagina, you guys.
So eventually she just looked at the judge and was like, Can you just get me a chalkboard? Because I'll explain all of this. And they did. And so she gave the jury a primer in codebreaking.
Nice.
They were like, oh, okay, we get it. Yeah. And then the attorneys just had no leg to stand on. So this just made her case completely crystal clear. And the trial was a success. These guys were convicted.
Awesome.
In 1939, William started experiencing some mood swings. He couldn't talk to Elizebeth about what his work for the government was because it was all top secret. As World War II began, William was at the center of the U.S.'s efforts to decrypt enemy code during the war. And don't forget that he was Jewish, so I think being so close to the atrocities and the genocide of the Jewish people must have really affected him, I would imagine.
Yeah, and if his family immigrated from Russia, chances are they were driven out of Russia in the pogroms, right? So, like, he has the family history of being forced out of a homeland in the first place, and then he has married someone who's not Jewish, which means his children are not Jewish. So he has that family conflict, and then World War II starts, and he's doing code breaking for people who are perpetrating genocide against Jewish people. So, yeah, challenging environment for him.
It must have been terrible and heartbreaking. Around this time, code writing had started to use machines. William was trying to crack Purple, which was a really difficult Japanese coding machine. And he was ultimately successful, but after he was finished, he checked into Walter Reed with a mental breakdown 3 months after the end of that project. Elizebeth visited him every day for 3 months while he was in the hospital, and he later said that she was responsible for pulling him out of the deep dark hole he had found himself in. William eventually returned to work, but he struggled with depression on and off for the rest of his life. In December 1941, after Pearl Harbor, that was that sentence. In December 1941... After Pearl Harbor, the U.S. started to put even more energy and resources towards code breaking.
Sure.
Elizebeth and her team were transferred to the Navy. Now, of course, she's a woman, so she can't possibly be in charge of this code breaking team. So they put a much less experienced naval officer. Yeah, they put a much less experienced penis in charge of this. During this time, Elizebeth was instrumental in convicting American Vivalee Dickinson as a Japanese spy.
Oh my goodness.
Vivalee is kind of interesting. So she was American, but she had gotten close to Japanese politicians and movers and shakers through her marriage and her husband's work and her own work. So I think that she became sympathetic to their cause. And so she started spying for the Japanese.
Oh my God.
She opened a doll shop in New York, and she would conduct her spy activities through this doll shop.
That's creepy.
Yeah, I know. In February of 1942, a letter was intercepted by wartime censors and given to Elizebeth to decrypt. And it was very complicated, like it was a lady in Seattle writing to a lady in Brazil about dolls. But it was talking about this doll and that doll and a wonderful doll hospital. It mentioned fishing nets and balloons as well. And it turned out that the dolls were just a code for warships. And the doll hospital was a shipyard where warships went for repairs. This is all near Pearl Harbor. Over time, several letters of this kind were intercepted and deciphered, which resulted in Vivaly going to trial for espionage. During the trial, she maintained that she was innocent and her husband was the spy, but she was convicted and imprisoned for espionage.
No, it's him. That's so rude. No, don't do that. What a jerk.
Yeah. So Elizebeth testified at that trial as well and was part of that.
For that trial, she just walked in. She's like, look, I'm going to need a chalkboard. I've been down this road before. You're going to need to give me a chalkboard.
So during World War II, the bulk of Elizabeth's work was to monitor Nazi activity in South America. So she was breaking up their spy rings by decoding their transmissions. Breaking code in German was easy stuff for her because she had even decrypted code in Chinese during her prohibition days. In these transmissions, this name kept popping up over and over again. It was Sargo. Elizabeth started to think that something big was going on because this name kept coming up. Now we know Sargo was Johannes Siegfried Becker, head of the SS in South America. He was like elite Nazi shit, this guy.
Fuck the SS. Let's be clear, fuck Nazis. Let's just be super clear.
In case you were wondering where we came down on this whole World War II thing.
Anti-Nazi.
Yeah. Elizabeth discovered that Becker's network was transmitting Allied ship locations in the Atlantic to Nazi U-boats. Basically, they were like, hey guys, they're over there. And the U-boats were like, great. In March of 1942, Elizabeth decoded a message about the Queen Mary. It was a British ocean liner that was the largest Allied supply ship, an important military asset. The Queen Mary was nicknamed the Grey Ghost during this period because they had painted her gray to make her more inconspicuous.
Blend into the mists of the Atlantic.
That's right, the Grey Ghost. Hitler offered $250,000 to whichever U-boat captain could take out the Queen Mary. That's how important of a asset she was. The Nazi network found her off the coast of Brazil and were planning an attack, but Elizabeth was able to intercept and decode the message, allowing the captain of the Queen Mary to evade and bring the ship safely into port. There were 8,000 people aboard that ship. That's like one action, and she saved 8,000 lives. Like, I can't imagine how many lives she saved through her career.
Yeah. Well, and this is the thing, too. Neil Stephenson wrote a book called The Cryptonomicon, which is basically about the English efforts to decode the Enigma device. Although I think Enigma was eventually actually decoded by the Poles, not the English. But anyway, in that book, he talks about it's not just that you decipher the code. It's that they can't know you've deciphered it because once they know you've deciphered it, they'll change it. And so, like, how do you act on what you know? Can you always do that?
I'm so glad you brought that up. That is actually my next point. Suddenly, the Brazilian police started arresting all of her Nazi spies that she was able to track. It turned out that that was done at the behest of J. Edgar Hoover. This is exactly the wrong thing to do in this circumstance. You don't arrest the spies who you're getting information from until you're done getting information from them. Because, A, not only do you no longer have that information, but they know you're onto their codes, exactly like you said, and they stop using those codes. And do they use an easier code after that? No, they make it harder to crack. These guys were arrested. Sargo went deep underground, and the Nazis started using Enigma in South America. Now, it wasn't the exact same Enigma code. There were apparently several. It wasn't the code that Turing and Bletchley Park was working on. It wasn't the same Enigma code.
And further proof, if we needed it, that J. Edgar Hoover was a goddamn moron.
Oh, yeah. As I said, Sargo went deep underground. He ended up setting up new networks and new codes that were harder to break. This was an almost impossible to crack code, and they're using a machine to generate it. And Elizabeth has a pencil and a piece of paper.
Yeah.
Those were her weapons in this war.
Yeah. She's fighting a computer with a stylus and a clay tablet.
Right. And her mind.
She's like, all I got is my brain and Sumerian. So, okay, let's go, computer. You and me.
Right. Around this time, though, she caught a lucky break, which is the Nazis made a mistake. They sent 28 messages out in the same key.
Ah!
She was able to intercept all 28 of those messages and use the fact that they were the same to start decrypting.
Right. It gives her a larger database of fragments to try and do frequency analysis on and that sort of thing.
Exactly. Because normally everyone would be different so that you couldn't do that. But they were dummies.
Somebody in the office got lazy that day. I'm going to go make coffee. Oh, shit.
She was able to lock back onto Sargo. So around this time, there was a fascist coup in Argentina in the summer of 1943. And then there was a fascist coup in Bolivia in December of 1943. What was happening was that Sargo was trying to create a Nazi front in South America so that, among other things, the U.S. would be fighting the war on two fronts. So this would have been absolutely devastating. And eventually the U.S. was able to break up the spy ring thanks to Elizabeth's information and her team. Chile, Bolivia, and Argentina left their alliance with the Axis powers and joined with the Allies.
Yeah.
So the Nazi threat in South America was eliminated thanks to their efforts.
No longer a force for antagonism for fighting the war, now just making it safe for the living Nazis to retreat to after the war and live in hiding the rest of their lives. Retirement home. It turned into a continent-wide retirement home.
Sargo disappeared. Sargo was no longer active.
This is one of my favorite conspiracy theories to track. I may do an episode on this in the future.
Do, because I'm really curious. So the thing is that Elizabeth had taken an oath to keep silent about her work during World War II, right? It was top secret work. Our friend J. Edgar Hoover stamped her 4,000 cracked messages with FBI identification numbers, officially taking credit for her work and erasing her extraordinary contribution.
The thing that disturbs me most about J. Edgar Hoover is the thing that always disturbs me, which is like, he was a closeted gay man at a time you were not allowed to be that. And so I'm sure that was very painful for him and very difficult. But because of that, instead of becoming a more compassionate and understanding human being, he became a fucking evil monster. And this idea that you can have a location of oppression and not be able to translate the pain and difficulties you experience from that and empathize with other people who have different locations of oppression really makes me angry. Really makes me angry. And I don't know why that transfer is so difficult, but it's one of the reasons that I hate J. Edgar Hoover with such a burning heat.
Yeah. In 1945, World War II ended, and Elizabeth found herself out of work at the age of 54. At this point, machines and computers started taking over code breaking, obviously. She really felt, this is the end of my era.
This pencil and I have been through some good times, but it looks like you new kids got a different way of approaching it. That's great for you.
Chalkboards aren't even high technology anymore. William did keep working, and he had a series of strokes in the 1950s. William and Elizabeth collaborated on a manuscript about Shakespeare from a codebreaker's perspective called The Shakespearean Ciphers Examined. In it, they dismissed the claims of Baconians. They were the expert on why this was all not true.
They're like, nah.
And of course, they hid a cipher in the book, which when decoded said, "I did not write the plays, F. Bacon."
Nice.
In 1969, William died of a heart attack. Elizabeth was an advocate of privacy. When the NSA formed, she was really suspect of that. And she kind of saw this thing that she helped create become a potential monster, the invasion of privacy. Elizabeth died on Halloween in 1980 in a nursing home, taking the truth of the full scope of her work to her grave. Thank goodness, in 2008, the government finally declassified her files and the full impact of her life's work came to light. That is the story of Elizabeth Smith-Friedman.
Oh, thank you so much. Oh, that was amazing.
She's a good one. Let's celebrate her. Let's all talk about her. This is finally out there. In 2008, that's not that long ago.
Well, and people who don't know anything about computers, I count myself among them, know who Alan Turing was, but I didn't know who she was. And she's American, for God's sake. She's a Quaker. Indiana. Who's your Quaker? I had no idea who she was. She's great. That's a great story.
Let's make her a part of the historical dialogue. Lord knows we need more heroes.
We need more heroes. Well, and we can make her a part of our pantheon, too.
I just want to mention the book by Jason Fagone one more time. If anyone's interested in a deep dive, I think I'm going to pick it up. The Woman Who Smashed Codes. Jason Fagone. Fagone. Look it up. He's a journalist. He journals.
He does nothing but journal. So he wrote that book after 2008. So after we learned of her contribution to this field and the lives she saved and the amazing things she did.
It was published in 2017, quite recently. I just was like, how did he find out about?
That's an interesting question, actually. Does the declassification of information happen like in batches? Like if you check a certain website on the second Tuesday of every month, do you see the things that have been declassified since the last Tuesday? I mean, how are they performing these data dumps? That's what I want to know.
I don't know, but we need to get on that email list.
We need to get on that list. That's awesome. Thank you so much, Claire. That was amazing.
You're welcome. Hey, thank you all so much for joining us today for It Chooses You. We will be back in the next episode. Please like, subscribe, and download the episodes. It really helps us spread the word. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Testing. Great. Thank you for listening to It Chooses You. Your hosts are Teresa Sparks and Claire Patton. Our theme song is by Bobby Dart. If you'd like to get in touch with us, drop us an email at itchoosesyoupodcast@gmail.com.